First, I welcome Dr. Fee. She is a marine ecologist at Weiningen Marine Research, specializing in invasion ecology, herbivory, and ecosystem functioning. Her work spans Caribbean seagrass meadows and temperate salt marshes, where she investigates the ecological process that drive ecosystem resilience with the goal of improving conservation and restoration of these valuable coastal ecosystems. Now, the virtual stage is yours. Welcome, Dr. Fee.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation to be here today. So I will share my screen. Yeah, so today I'm here to talk about my favorite ecosystem, which is seagrasses, and I did my PhD in seagrass ecology. First, a little bit about my background. So I graduated in 2011 from high school, and then I did a bachelor in biology at the University of Amsterdam. Afterwards, I did a master in marine biology, also at the same university. And then 2 years ago, I graduated from my PhD, which I did at Wageningen University, which is maybe not a well-known town in the Netherlands. It's a bit more east, not near the coast, but it's actually well known for its environmental research. Here are some pictures of the fieldwork courses that we did during my bachelor's, which really got me excited in doing fieldwork. Actually, we had a course in France and then in Portugal. And in Portugal was the first course where I did some marine work and get enthusiastic by that. So I followed up with a marine master. And in the marine master, we went to Curacao, which is an island in the Dutch Caribbean near the coast of Venezuela, where I learned scientific diving. And then I wanted to follow up on that. So my PhD topic was about the impact of large herbivores and invasive species on seagrass resilience and ecosystems functioning. My current job as a side step is that I'm also working as a salt marsh researcher on temperate salt marsh systems, as you see here. These we actually have within the Netherlands. But today I'm focusing on seagrass. So I first wanted to share this nice drawing to illustrate that we know, of course, and we're taught in high school that um, grasslands, for instance, are affected by all these impacts like nutrients and light, and these form and decide which kind of plant species can grow. But you can also have herbivores like deer, and then you can have wolf that prey on the deer and therefore influence this whole landscape. And we're kind of translating that to the marine environment, which is much less known, but these same processes apply. So here I have a video to dive into a seagrass meadow. You can see here these long leaves, and then suddenly there's a transitioning to very short leaves. And here it's grazed by sea turtles. So you can see the huge impact these sea turtles can have on the landscape, or seascape actually. And you can see different species. This is turtle grass and this is manatee grass. So a little bit about seagrasses. They occur worldwide. They come in very different shapes and sizes. Here you see some examples of seagrass species. You have over 60 species, and the highest diversity is in a tropical area. Seagrasses often grow in connection to other ecosystems. So here you see seagrass shoots in connection to a coral reef, and on the right you see them in connection to mangrove forest, and these ecosystems also support each other. So these linkages are really important. Yeah, for instance, fish that grow up in the seagrass meadows that later migrate to the coral reef. Or mangroves, for instance, filter the water, so it's a slightly better quality for seagrasses. Coral reefs provide shelter for the seagrass, and so on. So for seagrass, we've identified already a number of ecosystem services and more come up every year. Here you see some examples of all these services that seagrasses provide that are actually beneficial to us. So, for instance, seagrass forms a habitat for many different types of fish, some of which are we also consume. Um, Seagrass also stores a lot of carbon. Here you see a picture that I took in the Bahamas, where you see, well, this was actually a meadow destroyed by sand excavation. But then you really see this big section of stored carbon that's underneath the live seagrass meadow. Coastal protection is a picture of the Mediterranean. Here you see old seagrass leaves that wash ashore, and then they form a protective barrier actually for the beach to prevent erosion. And water quality. So, seagrass filters leaves and has been shown to also reduce harmful bacteria in the water. So, we now kind of are well on their way with showing how important seagrasses are, but at the same time, we're losing, like at a very fast rate, many of these meadows. For instance, due to eutrophication, so an excess of nutrients in the water. As you can see here, then the algae win the competition from the seagrasses. Or here on the right, you see anchoring or mooring in seagrass meadows that can cause fragmentation and can take really long to recover from that. So, within my thesis, I wanted to explore these balances between seagrass and their herbivores and look at the impact of several stressors on this balance. So, the impacts of invasive species, of nutrients, of predators, and of global change. And I wanted to see how that would cascade to the functioning of the seagrasses. So then we go back to the herbivores because you might think, what are those? So fish are important herbivores in seagrass meadows. Here you see them taking some bites of the seagrass leaves. You see these small half moon shaped bites. And another important herbivore is the sea turtle. Here you see that their impact can be quite big and bigger compared to these fish. So they can cut the seagrass really short and therefore have a big impact. So the thing with these sea turtles is that they have different types of grazing behavior. Here you can see some examples. So they have sort of browsing, random grazing behavior. They can return to the same patch. But when the meadow, when the sea turtle densities become really high, they can also start digging in the seagrass or graze it so short that the seagrass actually dies. So um, we know now that these sea turtle and I'm talking about sea turtles, but mostly this is green sea turtles, and their numbers have been really decimated in the past because of humans, but the last few decades, this is a graph of the number of publications about sea turtle grazing, but it coincides a bit with the number of sea turtles that has been increasing a lot in these last few decades. Um, so we're moving more towards this higher grazing pressure in seagrass meadows because the sea turtles have been recovering due to conservation efforts, but the seagrass has not been protected that well, and there's almost no conservation efforts for seagrass. Um, that's why there's a mismatch. Um, so within my research, I used the experimental approach. These are just some keywords what I focused on. So turtles and fish. I used a lot of these exclosures to study the impact of turtles. With drones, I did some seagrass mapping and I studied the nutrient content of the seagrass in the lab. So here the first project I want to focus on is that I wanted to look at the impact of herbivores on the expansion of an invasive seagrass. And this seagrass has been spreading throughout the Caribbean, and it originates from the Red Sea and the Indo-Pacific, but in the Caribbean it's invasive. So this is the Seagrass Bay on Bonaire we work in, and we found that here in green is the invasive seagrass. So over the years it has been increasing in cover, while the native seagrass in blue has been declining. So we thought, okay, what's happening here? Is the invasive seagrass maybe outcompeting the native seagrass, or is there another factor that's important? So what we did, we first saw that the invasive seagrass was mainly abundant in this area where there were lots of sea turtles. So we thought, let's see what the impact of sea turtles is on the expansion rate of invasive seagrass. And we set up these exclosures. And what we found was when we compare the cages to the open plots, that in the open plots, there were much more invasive seagrass shoots compared to inside the cages. So when there's a lot of grazing by sea turtles, there's a lot more space in between the native shoots, as you can see here. And the invasive seagrass could just really easily grow there, much more easy than within a dense native meadow. So this way, sea turtles actually kind of they don't eat the invasive seagrass. They keep on eating the native seagrass, and thereby they make more space for the invasive seagrass to expand. So sea turtles were the main mediator here, and there was no active competition between the seagrass species. And we did the same in an area with lots of fish grazing and no turtle grazing. We set up fish exclosures, and there we actually found the opposite effect. So within the cages, there was more expansion of invasive seagrass than in the open plots. And this is because the fish do eat the invasive seagrass, so they can provide some biotic resistance, it's called. So they immediately eat the invader and therefore they limit their growth. So it was quite interesting to see this opposite effect of both herbivores. And then we also did an additional test where we added nutrients to see the effect. And we saw that adding nutrients actually increased the number of fish bites on this invasive seagrass because nutrient enrichment makes these leaves more tasty for the fish. But this only happened in an area where there were already healthy fish densities. So that was on Bonaire, and on Aruba, for instance, there was way less fish, and therefore this effect of nutrients was not visible. Then we had an additional observation that we saw these bioturbation mounds that are made by ghost shrimp. We saw a lot of them in the meadow on Bonaire, and we hypothesized that these mounds were also used by the invasive seagrass, as you can see here, to colonize new area. Because then when there's a hill created by a bioturbator that works up the sediment, there's also a new area to colonize. And we've found that that was actually the case. We did some experiments. So to sum up, we can then explain the patterns in this bay. So here you see the bay, and then here you see this zone with lots of fish and no turtle grazing. And there the native seagrass can persist. But then in the middle, where there's lots of turtle grazing, the invasive seagrass can grow. And then the bioturbation hills increase in this area, and then the invasive seagrass can expand even more. So this is kind of using these simple exclosure experiments locally, we could explain the large-scale patterns in this bay. And here we had a separate project where we mounted a camera on top of a sea turtle, but here I just want to use that footage to show you the resulting seascape. So you see this big meadow with invasive seagrass and these hills of bioturbation. And here it encounters another turtle. So that was the first project I wanted to tell you about, and now we move to the next project. Um, Here we wanted to assess impacts of predators on sea turtle behavior and subsequent seagrass functioning. So seagrasses are grazed by green turtles in those are the biggest consumers, and then green turtles can be predated on by sharks, especially tire sharks. But as I mentioned before, so sea turtles are doing quite good now and their numbers are rising, which is really great. But at the same time, we are not protecting the seagrass enough and it's declining, and we're not protecting the sharks enough. So the sharks are really functionally extinct in many areas. So here is the same mismatch I told you about before, but even worse because we are also missing the top-down control of sharks. So to study the impact of shark presence on seagrasses and what it would mean if you lose these sharks, we went to an area which still has high shark abundance. So to the Bahamas, we went to Eleuthera, which is an island right there. And here, many big sharks are still present in this bay. Here you see a reef shark, but also tiger sharks and hammerhead sharks are frequently visiting this bay. And it's over here you have just like a homogeneous, nice seagrass meadow with long leaves. So it looks really different than what I'm used to on Bonaire, because there the leaves are so short because these turtles just mow the whole place. But here there were similar sea turtle densities, but the seagrass looked completely different. So we thought there might be this fear effect by the sharks that prevents the turtles from overgrazing the seagrass. And to test this, we put some structures in the area, and they were intended to function as kind of refuge areas for the sea turtles. So structures they might hide alongside. Um, and at the same time, we know that sharks don't like to hunt in these. They like to, so sharks prefer when they have a clear direction and they can swim for, like hunt by chasing, not by ambushing. So we figured that these structures would also prevent sharks from liking to hunt in them, so facilitating the turtles to be a bit safer. Um, and indeed, what we found was really, really cool that these structures created these little grazing patches right next to them. So turtles indeed liked these structures for safety, and then immediately you see the effect on the seagrass because they start overgrazing and really eating everything. Um, and we did this on a large scale as well. Here you see from the top all these structures, and then every circle. So you're looking at the drone video. Every circle is a turtle. So the turtle densities were really like higher than ever reported before within this area. And before we started the experiment, it was all dense, long seagrass, and these turtles created this huge grazing patch, and they really started to accumulate there and spend a lot of time resting and grazing. So from this, we conclude that, yeah, we temporarily created this low risk area where turtles increase their foraging rates. Um, and this has an impact on the seagrass length, which becomes quite short, uh, and is a low risk area within a larger high risk area where they use more this browsing strategy, just taking a bite every now and then. And here I have a video of what it looks like when these sea turtles feel safe and they just eat everything that they see. And here you see what the structure area looked like. And then at the end, it was just really barren, almost no seagrass left. And here, oh, yeah, and this is the example of a sea turtle that feels a bit less safe. So it takes a bite of the long leaves and then it swims onwards. We also looked at what this would do with the carbon content of the seagrass meadow, and we found that there was significantly less carbon stored in the heavily grazed meadow compared to the ungrazed meadow, or this is actually compared to the start of the experiment. Yeah, and you can imagine why. I think it's mainly so a lot more detritus stays within the system when it's not grazed heavily by sea turtles. So in the end, that also contributes to carbon stocks. But because this was just a few months, I think the main impact was because of erosion. So there's just a lot of carbon here that flows away. And then there's less carbon stored in this surface sediments. We also quantified this a bit more. So we looked at all these different ecosystem services, and we found that when there is intensive turtle grazing, you lose most of these services. When there's a little bit of grazing, some services go up, like the carbon. When there's a little bit of grazing, it can be good for carbon stored. And the nitrogen, yeah, so the leaves start growing a bit faster with a bit of grazing. But in general, the most surfaces were found, or the highest ecosystem value, with no turtle grazing. And with intensive turtle grazing, we lost all these surfaces. And yeah, you can imagine why. So, um, it's, I think, an important lesson, and we need to study this more, of course, but there can be this important fear effect of these predators that we actually lost in many present day meadows. So for instance, on Bonaire, we don't have predators anymore, and they really overgraze the seagrass there. And it's not that these sharks need to eat a lot of turtles, it's just that they impact the behavior of the turtles. So they feel a bit less safe, similar to wolves on land. I don't know if you know the example of Yellowstone Park. There they introduced the wolves, and then it was um, really great for biodiversity because the deer found areas where they were safe and unsafe, and the ecosystem really boomed. So you need these predators in your system, and it would be good if we focus on that a bit more. Um, if I think I have some time to also go to this last project. So here we wanted to study. So I showed you some images already, or some footage of videos of cameras that we placed on top of sea turtles. And we did this to study their behavior. So we developed an own system because these can become quite expensive, but we found a motor helmet camera that could film for a long time, for 5 hours. We added a depth sensor and a retrieval system. So this is just to show you how we placed these cameras. So we glued them on the carapace of the sea turtles, and we used corrosive links. So these links, they dissolve in salt water. So after 24 hours, the camera would dislodge and then float to the surface, and we could retrieve it. So this is what it looks like. This was just the place where the camera ended up on the beach. So the thing was, we wanted to study this to see if in the Bahamas we could see predator-prey interaction. So if we could see how these sharks would influence the turtles, and we wanted to study their grazing behavior. So how much seagrass do they eat, at what time of day, which species, questions like that. But the footage we got was really not what we expected. So what we saw was lots of humans on the video, and they were feeding the sea turtles. And it was quite concerning behavior because we saw that these sea turtles would just wait in one area of the bay. So it was a selection. We also captured the turtles there. So there were all other turtles that did not do this behavior, but we accidentally just selected turtles that were really adapted to human foraging. So these tourist boats would come up, they would just wait around, and then when they would be there, they would be fed squid or fish or other things. So that's also unnatural food, but these sea turtles will eat anything you can give them. They do like that kind of food. And we saw that these sea turtles became quite aggressive towards people, but also towards each other. Um, and it was unnatural behavior for them to rest in big groups because I think it also makes them much more vulnerable to shark attacks, for instance. So here's some video of what it looked like. Um, the sea turtles are being fed squid, and we also recorded them biting each other or biting the tourists. Or I think in general it was quite clear that this is not a good idea. Um, and we wrote an article on this, also made a press release to kind of spread the message that feeding sea turtles is not a good idea. You should generally avoid that because there are lots of um, yeah, boat trips, and they want to predictably attract turtles for the tourists, but you will see these turtles anyway. You don't need to feed them. Yeah, so overall, I have some lessons here from my PhD work specifically. So I really like these small scale cage experiments to study herbivory in seagrass meadows. But we did find out that these cages can have an effect themselves, so they can attract fish or attract turtles in high predator environments. Um, and we found that these animal-born video had a really nice opportunity to discover new things, but we also want to continue with that to study more natural behavior. And what's also interesting is that there can be huge variation in grazing pressure even within a bay. So these herbivores can really dictate what it looks like by their behavior and their densities. And I think, oh yeah, these were some conclusions. Um, yeah, I just want to stress the importance of protecting seagrass meadows. Um, Also in light of these other ecosystems that they cooperate with. I also have some examples here of some science communication I did because this is mostly in Dutch, by the way, but I think it's really important because seagrass is so undervalued, and it's because of that, it's the least protected marine habitat worldwide. And I think raising awareness, like in this webinar or with Seagrass Month or Seagrass Day, that's super valuable because the more people hear about seagrasses and why it's so important, the more research will be done, the more money will be allocated towards conserving and restoring these habitats. So that's why I think it's really important to kind of spread the message also to a general public. So I spent quite some time on that. And this is, I think, yeah, my last slide, just with a lot of collaborators. I spent a lot of time in the field with many, many students, which they all helped me out incredibly well. Um, yeah, across the Caribbean, mostly on Bonaire, but then also in the Bahamas. So this is just to get a glimpse of the fieldwork stuff. And yeah, with that, I'd like to thank you. If you have any questions also after this webinar, you can always send me an email. But if you have any questions now, I'm also really happy to answer.